Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It is me, Mashira's Cameron, and today we're going to be doing a review on Welcome to Weshaven. So this is a 1 hour feature-length film, I guess you could say, from Menacing Studios. And if you've ever watched my channel, you know I've done just a few videos on their channel in the past, mainly during their fan film era when they were doing fan films pretty much daily, weekly. Not weekly, that's not true, but they were releasing a few fan films a year and they were doing a lot of trailers and things like that. So it was just a lot of content for me to review. Very similar to them, I've moved away from fan films, and so have they. And 2 days ago, they released their feature film, Welcome to Weshaven. It's a horror film. You get those 90s vibes. And I watched it and I wanted to review it because I've been following their channel for a while and I wanted to. So, yeah. I'm going to do this very similarly to the way I review fan films because I'm not going to create a new criteria for one film because I just don't have the energy for that. But I'm going to just start by saying I really did enjoy this film. I went into it having pretty high expectations, I'll say, because I really did expect them to really go above and beyond with this, knowing how much was put into the production of this film. And I'll say I really did see how much, I really could tell how much work they put in. And I'm not going to say it went below my expectations in any way. I'll say it really did blow me away. It was such an incredible film. And I'm not just saying that because the film was there weren't specific things about the film that really blew me away. I think it was just the film as a whole really worked. Because if you've ever seen a 90s, 2000s horror things I love, I'll say my favorite one is Final Destination. This does not give Final Destination vibes. But what this does give is vibes from Scream. And I'll say Scream is one of my favorites. I think honestly Scream is probably my second favorite. It's just incredible. And this film does such a good job. I wouldn't say mimicking Scream, but I'll say you cannot watch this film and not get vibes from Scream. You have the idea of it being very meta with the film aspects coming into it. You have the film itself being very the idea there's the film nerds, what they would do. And having two killers at the end with one being the predictable one being the non-predictable one. There's so many ways this film is very similar to Scream. Even the main characters, the Courtney main name, is very much a reference to Scream. But I really did enjoy how this film just overall operated, and it felt even though it felt a lot like Scream, it still did feel like its own thing because it was still doing its own thing. It still felt like it had its own ideals, and even though I could tell almost every single reference from Scream, it still felt like it was trying to be its own film. It was still having its own plot. It had its very interesting idea with the legacy killers, very similar to Friday the 13th, even. And yeah, I just really enjoyed how it played out. So let's just begin with a lot of things I really did enjoy about this. Firstly, I'll say the cinematography was very strong. I really did enjoy a lot of the shots in this film, a lot of the ways that the camera was working throughout it. And I'll say, I wouldn't say anything with the camera was overall shocking. And I'll say you could tell that it was a younger cinematographer. It wasn't someone who was super who hasn't done this for years of their lives, but or not years, but someone who hasn't been fully trained in cinematography to the extent someone a professional would. And yet it still did look very good. There were a lot of shots that did look very professional. I will say the close-ups, I'll say, in this film were definitely a standout shot because they really did a great job with the way that they were using the lighting involved. And I'll say the lighting was also one of the strongest parts of this film. Very similar to the cinematography, I'll say the lighting was, in my opinion, one of the best behind-the-scenes parts of the film. I think a lot of the shots, especially when they were using the police not sirens, the police lights, I think was done very well. And I think in contrast with the cinematography, there was times that the shots became slow motion. And I'd say when that happened, that's when I think you could tell how great the lighting and cinematography was because those slow motion shots did look very good. It was some of those quicker shots, for example, the basketball game, overall looked pretty good. It just sometimes wasn't doing a great job getting everything in frame, which is something I do think you could see in some younger, more amateur films. Next thing I'll say is the acting and performances. I'd say overall, almost every single performance in this film was very strong. I think there were some performances that were way stronger than others, and I'm not gonna like point out any actors because again, this is a young film. However, I will say, looking at the way that this was cast and the actresses and actors that are in it, there are stronger characters and stronger actors, and there are weaker actors. I will say the standout performance, in my opinion. I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember the majority of the names because I watched this 2 days ago, and I'm also sick, kind of, because allergies are a thing. But the kill, I'm gonna spoil it. I'm gonna be honest, but the second killer, not Lonnie, but the second killer, the podcaster, he was the standout performance, 100%. I got the vibe that he was the killer. I think about 30 minutes in, I think like it became clear knowing Scream and how that film operates. But I loved his performance in it because he had that perfect like innocent yet he can become that edgy villain vibe, which is what these movies need, and he performed it so well. His performance, in my opinion, like I loved seeing him on screen every single time. Like I don't know, I'm gonna talk about sequels in a little bit, but if they were to do a sequel, they need to bring him back. He was incredible. Um, Next, let's talk about the ending because I think the ending was very interesting. I had no clue how this film was going to end. This was the one thing I was like, I knew how the majority of the film was going to go. I didn't know how it was going to end. I will say, firstly, the ending feels like very abrupt. Like I don't know how. Like I'm having trouble pronouncing words today, but the ending comes out of nowhere in a way. Like you could tell that final battle was the final battle, but for example, we never really get an idea of what happens to Courtney after that. Like what I don't know if she fully died. I could have missed something. I thought she was only unconscious. I don't think she died. I could be wrong though. But I love the idea of it ending with the main villain and it being like this is welcome to Weshaven with that like ending quote for the podcast. I think it's so fascinating. And I think his motives as well are really cool because I really like the idea of him like trying to make his like the best film he can because no one like because he wants to be the best, and I think that's very similar to what Scream 5 does, which very differently, but it's like they need to take it back to basics so that they can make a good film. And I feel like it's very similar to what they're doing here, and I feel like that's one of the strongest things. I think when I heard about his motive, I actually really didn't enjoy it because I think that's such a fascinating way, and yeah, I think in today's modern era that's something that could 100% happen. um I will say, now I'm going to talk about some weaknesses. I might go back to strengths in a little bit, but there's two weaknesses I do want to point out quickly. The first thing I would say is sound effects. The sound design, the music overall, the music was very good. I'm going to say that. The music I really did enjoy. Where I felt this film was lacking was in the sound effects and sound department, which is that a lot of the times there was a lot of effects and scenes that would be muted with only music. So, for example, there was like a lot of times I think in the opening where like car doors would be slammed or like they would be running, and you wouldn't hear any of the running, you wouldn't hear any of the noise. You would just hear the music and like some ambient wind blowing. And I'll say for me at least, something that makes horror movies like really cool at least is the way that they're like panning some of the audio with the footsteps and stuff, so you can really hear the panic. And I'll say I feel like this film kind of removed that in the fact that they were muting a lot of the scenes. So like they had like the stabbing sound effect, but they didn't have like the pitter patter. I feel like there was like one time they stepped in a puddle, and I feel like they could have done a really cool thing with the splash. Like I feel like in that sense they kind of didn't do as much as they probably could have done with the sound effects. And I'll say that was something I definitely didn't notice. I don't think it's that bad of a thing. Like I think it's still pretty solid. I just feel like they could have done more to really elevate it because the sound effects really can elevate a scene, especially when the music isn't at a lot of the time it is, but sometimes the music isn't doing as much as it could be doing. What is there was a one other big thing I did want to talk about. Am I blanking on it? Let's see. Until then, I do want to talk about the overall. Oh, I do remember. Okay. One thing. Wait, let me just, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry about that. One other weakness I will say that I definitely did notice was, as much as I did love the connections to Scream, it sometimes was too much. And when I say that, I mean it's great to take influence from a film, especially like Scream, for something like this. However, there were times that I think the Scream references went too far. And what I mean by that is a lot of the characters who were like doing the Scream stuff were not doing it in the way that it could really, that it doesn't pay tribute in the same way I think it was imagined to be paying tribute. And I don't think that's necessarily an issue. However, I just don't think some of the scenes worked the same way that I really would have wanted them to. So, for example, they mentioned that one horror film, and they have the quote about killers like cleansing the world or something and getting rid of the undesirables. I think that's a very interesting idea. And they mention it once with the killer leaving that with the note. And obviously, we know at the end of the film why. But I feel like they could have done a lot more with that quote. I feel like at the end of the film, even during that final battle, he could have said like they're, because she's like, "Are you just one of those sick killers?" And he's like, I don't fully even remember what he says, but I feel like he could have been like, "I'm just someone who's trying to get rid of those who shouldn't be here." Like I feel like that would be very interesting. I really like the idea of one being an ex-lover, and I think Lonnie is very easy to pinpoint as one of the killers. And again, I could predict the other one, as I said, I think a little bit in also because I know Scream, and that's part of the issue. I think people who've never seen Scream will not be able to predict the second killer or maybe even the first killer. But for me, I was able to predict both pretty easily and pretty early on. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think if they were really going for this film being built on that reveal, I think that there were too many references to Scream that would be pointing in that direction. Because, for example, the second killer coming in covered in the blood and then being like, I like I just got attacked as well. I knew right from there. I was like, yeah, he's the killer because that's such a Scream thing to do. And I think people who've never seen Scream would never guess that. But I feel like those who have, and I think the majority of people who are watching this film have, I think it just leads it to being not as much of a reveal as it being much more of like a cool like action part of the film, I'll say. But I feel like if they were making this really built on that reveal, and they wanted that reveal to be a big thing, I think there were too many things that were similar to Scream that would have been revealing that. Because I'm not, I've only seen Scream like once or twice, and even though I've only seen that film once or twice, I still could tell most of those things. So yeah, but I'd say overall this film is still very strong. Let's see what else. I'd say the screenplay overall was very good. I did like how a lot of the scenes were written. I'll say there were some scenes that were written a little bit interesting. Some scenes were definitely written not as good. I'd say overall though the majority of it was written very well though. I think the majority of the dialogue was very like mature. It felt very like set for the time period. And I really think overall that worked very well. And I'd say the final big thing, because, yeah, I think the final thing that I want to talk about here before I end the video is the way that it mixes modern and classic horror. And I'll say modern horror films, for me personally, don't work because I think they're doing too much and they're not what horror films really used to be. And I think that nowadays, horror is a genre. I would say back in like the 80s and 90s, really, horror was like a force to be reckoned with. And when you think about the way horror, like we think about it today with Halloween, Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, all of those things, they all came out around the same time. Those were like dominant, and like those were like having 6 7 films in a series, and that's because horror was such a like a dominant force at that time. And I think nowadays, I think that's not what horror is, but I think what this film does so well is it feels like that 90s film, it feels like that early 2000s film, yet it is still set in modern day, so it's able to use modern day ideas and things like that and not have to make it a period piece, but you still get those period piece vibes, and I think that really works for this film. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I really did love this film. I know I had a few negatives to talk about, but overall, I really did love it. This film was really incredible. I think this is the best thing Menacing Studios has ever done. I am hoping to see Bounty at some point. I don't know if Spider-Man Bounty is ever going to happen though. I think at this point, what I'm very curious to see is what Menacing Studios does from here. I think I could be wrong at this point, though. But I think at this point, this is when they go off to college. Like this is their senior year at high school. So I am curious to see if they could where Menacing Studios is going to continue because I think we could be seeing a West Haven too because that's what many horror films do. But however, I also couldn't see one in a way because this film I feel like wraps up so well. But I don't know. I could really see this going a thousand different ways. I can see the studio going a thousand different ways. But I want to end by saying this film was really incredible. I loved watching it, and I can't wait to see where they go next. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.